who more? This is the man, kind of the brains behind the operation, keeping us intact and managing this growing organization.
Another great voice in this valley, a great inspiration to many of us, was Ezra Taft Benson. And he lifted his voice of warning to us about those who are not of good intent in our government, the special interests that are conspiring behind the scenes to take away our sovereignty, to take away our Constitution. And so we're really at a time of decision today because his warnings are in fact coming to pass before our eyes. But we have a choice because we have freedom of choice. We have a choice about what we're going to do with our lives and how we can make a difference with our lives.
To the Constitution. But let me assure you that what I have learned in the last 8 months, there is no reason for me to remain skeptical. There's no reason for you to be skeptical. Our message of liberty and the Constitution is alive and well. Constitution, that we have neglected it, we have taken it for granted, and we have allowed those in Washington to take advantage of us. But it's up to us now, the people, to restore the rightful control over the government. The Constitution was written as a prohibition against government power. It was written to control the government, never to control the people. commander-in-chief of the military, never the commander-in-chief of the people. Unfortunately, we have forgotten our way. We have forgotten what we should have learned and kept in mind for so many years. And that is the principle of the Constitution. Means there should be a division of power, there should be a separation of powers, there should be checks and balances. Today, tragically, what we have a government where the Congress doesn't do what it's supposed to do, the executive branch does more of what they should be doing, and the Supreme Court is legislating which they should never be allowed to do. Our goal and reduce the size of government to its proper role, just think of one of the first things that we could achieve, because it would no longer be necessary. We could quickly repeal the 16th Amendment and get rid of the IRS. This still seems to be a strange position to hold when we look at the other candidates and when we look at what the media asks, because they quickly follow up and they ask this bewildering question. They say, what do you want to replace it with? How about nothing? And of course, if they don't have all our money to spend, then we would have to reduce the size and scope of government to its proper level. But you know, the way that income tax is collected and the principle of the income tax is based on the theory, and the unwarranted theory, that the government owns us and owns the fruits of our labor. The government then, even if the tax were 1%, they would have 100% control of the principle that they own all the income and they're giving us permission to keep just a small amount. So it is for this reason that we have to stick to the principle that we own the fruits of our labor. Or a few months or a year to get exactly what we want. Why don't we have a rule for Congress that all senators and all congressmen are forced to fill out their own tax return on April 15th on the House floor, and they can't leave until they get the job done. But indeed, we do have a lot of problems. We do have a lot of problems. The government is out of control. We're avoiding the Constitution. Our personal liberties are challenged. And we essentially ignore entirely Article 1, Section 8, which is explicit and tells us what authorities the Congress has. There's a couple of provisions there that I want to talk about that I think are maybe more important than others. One has to do with war. Our founders had an explicit reason why they were concerned about the tyranny of the king. And one was the oppression of the military establishment on the settlers and the colonial people of that time. So they were very explicit. They did not want to have a government where the executive branch was in charge of and had the authority to go to war. This is the reason for the provision that this country was never to go to war unless there was a declaration by the Congress through the people speaking out. Under those conditions, we would go to war rarely. We would go to war to win. We would get the war over with, and we would come home. But because of this careless attitude about our foreign policy and about how we go to war, we have literally, as a people, allowed our government to build an American world empire. We're not an empire, we're a republic. There's a couple reasons why a country should turn into an empire. Financially, it's unsustainable, and I'm afraid we're facing up to that crisis. We are now spending close to $1 trillion a year overseas. That money ought to be spent here at home. Instead of weakening our defense, we would strengthen our defense by more wisely spending the money and actually removing the dangers that we provoke because of our involvement in countries where we were admonished by the founders never to get involved. They said, don't get involved in the internal affairs and entangling the alliance of others. We literally would be safer with a stronger military if we accepted the admonition of the founders and followed the Constitution of having a strong national defense and very simply adopting the policy of mind our own business. Now what would that mean rather quickly? And Commander-in-Chief has the authority to move troops around. What we could do rather quickly, we could bring our troops home. Not only from the Middle East, which is causing us so much grief, but what about bringing them to home? Don't you think it's long enough, 55 years to be in Korea? It's time to come home from Korea. How about Japan? Do we need troops in Japan? We trade with them. Bring them home from Japan. What about Europe? Bring them home from Europe. Let the Europeans deal with their own national defense. You know, there's an important practical political message here about dealing with foreign affairs and expenditures. We can't solve all the problems of the welfare state overnight, but we need to make a move in the right direction. We can deal politically. It's more acceptable to deal with this huge expenditure which is endangering our country with the spending overseas by cutting there. So if we're spending $1 trillion, we could easily save hundreds of billions of dollars and not suffer in our national defense. But literally then we would have funds without raising taxes, cut down the deficit, actually cut taxes, and we really would have enough funds to tide over the people who have become dependent on the government, make sure that we throw nobody out on the streets with lack of medical care or lack of retirement benefits. There's no need to do that. If we follow this principle of a movement away from the entitlement state, then we could offer a transition period, especially to the young, who are wise enough to realize that paying into the Social Security system for the next 50 years won't serve their interests. So the solution is very easy. money in this overseas expenditure, take care of those who are dependent, and allow our young people or anybody else who want to be self-dependent and self-reliant, let them get out of the Social Security system. As most of you know, especially in this audience, there is no authority in the Constitution for the United States government to take over public education. So we very easily, without any pain or suffering, quickly get rid of the Department of Education. The one thing is, if we are chosen to lead this country, we will not do the opposite of what we say. If we say we're against the Department of Education, we will follow through and make sure it happens. There's another provision in Article 1, Section 8 that I consider very important. It has to do with the monetary issue. I believe that the monetary issue it's been a long time, more than 100 years, where it has ever even come up in a campaign. And yet I have brought it up in every single campaign that I have been involved in since 1974 because I consider it so crucial. The value and the integrity of the monetary unit is something that is crucial, and that responsibility has been given to the Congress. It was never given to a secret bank, never to the Federal Reserve. Therefore, it should be abolished. There are a lot of other reasons why we should have a fiat paper money system and that we should obey the Constitution and have only gold and silver. It is the fact that they're able to debase the currency, create money out of thin air, which literally finances big government, whether it's for war or for welfare. Politicians don't have to act responsibly because they can dilute the penalties, they can disperse the penalty from one generation to next, they can cause the prices to go up, which most people refer to as the inflation, but the real inflation is the increase in the money supply. But what is done there is to make some people suffer more than others. Every time in history when a currency has been destroyed, guess what? Guess who gets wiped out? It's the poor and the middle class and the wealthy benefit from this system. We don't have a lot of responsibilities at the federal level. They're very minimal. They're certainly not the police that we're over have the welfare state. But we are supposed to protect our borders. Today we have many of our border guards sent to Iraq. More concerned about the borders of Iraq and Syria than they're concerned about our own borders. This is sort of what the problem was with 9/11. Seoul, Korea was protected better than Washington, D.C. and New York. I mean, we should be protecting ourselves and taking care of our national defense. Before 9/11, we were spending $40 billion a year for collecting intelligence. Deeply buried into this intelligence was all the evidence that we needed in order to know what was coming. But because of the bureaucracy and because of our lack of concern about So thinking about national security and national sovereignty is not a selfish thing. That is a responsible thing to do and absolutely necessary. Toward restoring our sovereignty in this nation, we certainly would reject in its entirety the movement toward the security and partnership and prosperity partnership. We don't need more international government. We don't need a North American Union. We'll have no need to be in the United Nations. We wouldn't need the IMF. We wouldn't need the World Bank. We wouldn't need the WTO. We would need to be taking care of ourselves and reducing the size of government. We do not need to be introducing a new level of government. Even today, as we struggle to protect the liberties of individuals who pick and choose alternative medicines, and the chance to buy their vitamins and nutritional products, they're being overly regulated for the benefit of drug companies. They're trying right now to move this into WTO regulations to internationalize these controls for the benefit of drug companies. We need to stop that for sure. Empires and systems of government that are runaway socialism always end usually with a bankruptcy. And we're seeing evidence today of that bankruptcy. We have been living beyond our means. This country appears on the surface to be very wealthy. Unemployment rates aren't that bad. I think there's an underemployment, and I certainly think that the people's standard of living is going down. Real wages are going down. And that eventually we have to deal with this, and if we don't deal with this monetary issue, then we will be in big trouble. But these empires end with monetary and financial crises. And what we're watching in the dollar market today, in the stock market, the Nasdaq bubble collapsing, the collapse of the housing bubble, this is all an indication that we are moving into an era where we as a nation will be forced to live beneath our means. When that comes, there are political threats to our liberty, much more so than we're even suffering today. So this is the reason that our voices have to be heard. We have to let the country know that there are answers to these problems, and they're not difficult. The problems are astounding, but the reason and the way we got here is not confusing, and the answers are not confusing. We got here because we did not respect the rule of law, we didn't respect the Constitution. All we have to do is live up to the rule of law. Because with a war mentality, the people are expected to accept this silly, outrageous notion that the only way we can be safe and secure is that we have to sacrifice our liberties. That is never necessary. We have a war against the nebulous term terrorism that is we're told, is going to go on forever. Another justification to undermine our personal protection and our personal liberties. And this is something that we need to deal with, because today we have allowed, as a people, we have allowed our government to take over so much power. When you think now today that habeas corpus, in over 1,000 years, it took so long to get this principle of habeas corpus embedded into our system of law. And today, astoundingly, we are neglecting that. We have arrested American citizens without a right of having an attorney in a trial. They are declared enemy combatants, denied rights, held in secret prisons and tortured. And that is not the American way. I tell you. The Insurrection Act, written early in our history in 1807, put strict prohibitions on the executive branch declaring national emergency and national law. It's never really had to be used, and this was reinforced after the Civil War with the forthcoming homicide. But that has virtually been eliminated. That a president now, let me guarantee you, I would never use this authority, but there's authority on the books now where a national emergency and martial law can be declared for nebulous reasons, for health reasons, for another attack on us. And this, to me, is actually setting the stage where we literally, in the form of either an international crisis or a monetary crisis, that the groundwork has been delayed for the removal of all our liberties. And this is what this campaign is all about. This campaign is about not something new and different. It's the continuation of what has made America great. We don't have to go back to something ancient. We have to continue this modern notion of individual liberty and limited government, and we can protect all of our personal liberties. You know, most people in the country, certainly anybody in the conservative libertarian area, know that guns are very dangerous. Guns are very dangerous when they're handed to criminals. And we know that the authorities and the governments have a responsibility to deal with people who use guns in violence. But we all know that you don't register the guns of law-abiding American citizens. Understand the concept of blowback and unintended consequences. But what we shouldn't do what they propose about guns. We shouldn't register the American people. That won't do any good. And that is what's happening with this proposal and rapid movement to the national ID card, which we should totally reject. To a country that's slipping away, becoming less free, becoming a totalitarian country, is that whether or not we as a people can leave freely from our own country. Generally speaking, we can still leave, but less freely than we used to, so we're moving in the wrong direction. We have an electronic barrier that is being placed on internally but externally. Today, if you want to go to Canada, if you want to go to Mexico, they're telling us that we have to have a passport to leave the country. That is exactly the opposite of what we're happen to be one of the third of the country's people who don't deal in checking accounts and in banks, and they deal in cash, which is taboo with many in government. They don't like people who deal in cash. But if you happen to have saved your money and you didn't have your passport and you walked across the border with $10,000, you're going to be arrested and your money's going to be taken away from you. So if we live in a free society, we ought to any time have the privilege of leaving and taking our wealth with us, and that will be a check on the government. Being undermined, our economy has been weakened, our dollar is in shambles, our foreign policy is a mess, we have a lot of bills to pay, and young people are concerned about being drafted, we're worried about the war being spread, but actually the problems aren't that difficult. Easy to understand. We have strayed from the admonitions and the concerns and the guidance that we've been given. We have been blessed to live in the greatest of all countries. We've been blessed to have the greatest of all constitutions. And it would be our fault if we neglect it, if we don't exert our effort to restore these liberties. So it is up to us to make sure they hear our message. The reason why we should be optimistic, unlike the Soviet system when they collapsed, they did not have the traditions that we had. We have the conditions of sound money. We have the conditions of individual liberty and private property ownership. Although, unfortunately, we see the undermining of the principles of private property with this outrageous attack on private property through eminent domain, which we should not allow. Back to restore these principles, unlike so many other countries. So therefore, if we do the right things, if we emphasize the principles of liberty and understand why it's in our best interest, understand why it is a humanitarian position to take. Those in the opposition who say that you have to have an entitlement state, they grab the moral high ground telling them that we are going to take care of the poor, we're going to take care of education needs and medical needs. And yet the very truth is, the more you turn that responsibility over to the government, not only are we less free, but we have less of those services that we're supposed to provide for by ourselves. But if we allow our rulers to slip away, maybe there will be a time where we can come together like this. Maybe we will have less protection of the First Amendment. There will be do-gooders, and everything is done by do-gooders who say they're going to take care of us. They're going to make sure that we are obeying, and if you take harm, you have no worries. But if we don't do that, though, of course, we may lose this opportunity. So hopefully it isn't dire. Hopefully we will have time, but we have to pursue this diligently and determinedly to make sure that these liberties don't further slip away. And to me, the main reason for all this, the purpose of government ought never be to become the nanny state. The purpose of government should be very limited. The purpose of government, very simply, should be, as all political action should be, and that is to protect liberty, nothing more. To assume responsibility for oneself. We have to assume that it is up to us to suffer the consequences if things don't go well. If we can't take from our neighbors or use the government to take from our neighbors. But we have to have the faith and the confidence that freedom really does work if we only have the confidence in freedom. So we have lost our confidence and understanding which we have to restore. The purpose of living in a free society, and ultimately for civilized people, is to offer the opportunity to personally strive for excellence and virtue. That's what life should be all about. Anytime the government assumes that responsibility of promoting virtue and excellence and fairness and economic prosperity, they cannot do it without undermining liberty. So we have to keep our eye on the ball, eye on the target. The target is, and the competence is, defending that which was bestowed upon us, not by our government, by our Creator, and that is individual liberty. In closing, I want to quote an old saying from Europe. I believe it was a Scottish saying. When you get despondent, you can think about this, because think of each and every one of us having a candle. Because the Scottish saying was that there is not enough darkness in the whole world to put out the light of one wee candle. Was totally, well, let us say we had a candle sitting here and you could barely see it. But let us say the room keeps getting darker and darker and darker. The light seems to be brighter and brighter and brighter. So there is reason to be hopeful. It isn't so much to say, well, 51% of the people aren't with us. But this light of liberty and the light of hope and the light of America, because it is darker around us, actually our light is starting to shine brighter than ever before. So it is up to us to keep taking that candle, whether it's individually, whether it's writing or teaching or on the internet. Take that candle and light other candles so that once and for all, the light of liberty will be seen not only by everybody in this country, but everybody throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Forever.